Welcome to JasonWhiskyWise. My name is Jason. Welcome to this whiskey review, where today, here on the channel, we're going to be reviewing the Lakes 1 Port Cask. So this is a sample over here that I got from the Lakes Distillery, and this one over here is bottled in 2020. I believe the Lakes 1 Port Cask was actually released in 2019. But if you haven't heard my story about the Lakes Distillery and sort of a little bit of info into them, I'll leave a link to the top corner. Feel free to check a playlist where I've covered so far some of their single malts and also one of the blended ones called a signature blend. So this is going to be sort of an introduction into the blend series because I've got 5 to cover and I thought may as well get all 5 reviewed here on the channel. So the Lakes 1 Port Cask finished. This is a rather interesting one because the 1 series is where they combine the Lake single malt spirit and then they sort of blend it together masterfully with single malts from Scotland and single grains from Scotland, and they create this blend. So I'll get straight into this whiskey without sort of keeping us further any longer. In terms of age of this whiskey, it's a no age statement. In terms of ABV, it's bottled at 46.6% ABV. The cask selection for this one is a first fill Tawny and Ruby port cask that go into making this whiskey. In terms of the actual price point on a full-size bottle, this is going to be in front of Mr. Bananas now, it's going to be about £48. I probably like picking it up there. But it's going to be about £48. And in terms of exclusivity, I don't believe this is exclusive as it's part of their 1 series, so they're always going to be producing these blends. And it's quite interesting because, again, to blend your own single malt with Scottish single malt and Scottish grains, it's rather a challenging thing, especially when you've got unique casks like port. Now, many of you know from experience here on the channel, if you're long-term viewers, I love port cask whiskies, and it's going to be interesting to see how this one comes out, because I just reviewed, I believe it was the Lakes Colheita, which is part of the Whiskimaker's editions. I'll leave a link to that up there in the corner as well. And that one, well, I'll let you guys see that one then and see this one as well, or watch that one after this one and see my opinions between the two. Now, this one over here, it's natural color, non-chill filtered and natural color, so it's exactly what you want, and it's got a slight tinge to it. It's almost got a pinkish tinge with I don't know, it's got that orangey pinkish tinge to the liquid on this one. Very interesting. I'm excited to jump into this one. In terms of the actual whiskies from Scotland, to what I've read online, I think it's Speyside and Islay whiskies with Lakes single malt. But I think that's more than enough of an introduction. Let's dive straight into the nose of this whiskey. Into the nose. So to begin things out on the nose for the Lakes 1 Port Cask finish, for me, this one has got a slightly astringent nose, but behind that, you get a base sort of line of apples. And this is, for me, it's rich, sharper, but cider apples. There is a nice sort of ripe apricots and raisins and peaches, these stone fruits combined with a little bit of these dried fruits as well, which is very interesting. And there is even a little bit of what reminds me of dark grapes, but not the actual full grape. This is just the grape skins. Following from there, you're getting a bit of citrus, and this is citrus peel, but probably more towards, I'd say, tangerines and tangerine oils. And there is a sweeter cherry note. For me, it reminds me of a Morello cherry. Nice richness. And then there's, again, baked fruits that follow behind this one. This is baked apples, baked pears, these baked orchard fruits. Such a beautiful nose on this one. It's sort of going across the spectrum of all these different beautiful characters that I normally find in some of the older port cask whiskies that I've tried in the past. This one's got it, and I'm surprised because I don't know how old the stocks that go into this one, but it definitely feels it's much more above. The blending on this one is done very well. For me, I'm even getting raspberries and a little bit of red fruit, but behind all that there is this little bit of this orange peel, adding to what I've got before on the tangerine oils. And if you guys can hear a little bit of rain outside, that is because it went from a British summer to effectively a British summer. It went from sunny to absolutely raining. I don't know what's wrong with the weather today. Who knows at the minute? The weather just keeps changing. I wouldn't be surprised if it starts snowing in 5 minutes, but fingers crossed it doesn't, because I'll freeze to death in here. So without further ado, me and Mr. Bananas, we're going to jump into the palate for this whiskey. Slunge. So to start us off on the palate for this whiskey, texture-wise, the texture of this one has a medium texture on arrival. However, I highly recommend, if you're drinking this along with me right now, hold this on your palate for about a few seconds more than what you would normally do. And what you'll start to see is this one starts to develop a bit more of a creamier texture. And it's beautiful how it sinks into your jawline, into the sides of your palate. And you really start to get a sense of these juicier fruits behind this one. Red, ripe plums, goji berries, cherries, even a bit of pineapple I'm getting on this one. Very interesting that I got that. But with that, I'm also getting red licorice, and it reminds me of those licorice laces. And then the spices start to come as well. And these are smoked spices, or maybe even what you'd say is pan smoked spices, when you put spices on a pan before you're going to cook something, you just want to extract those extra characters from those spices so they open up a little bit. And these are like cloves, nutmeg, a little bit of that, even that burst of gingery heat on this one. But it doesn't feel aggressive, it doesn't feel powerful as I found in some other whiskies from the Lakes. This one is really working in harmony with those fruitier profiles. It is a pleasure to drink this whiskey. So let's get into the finish next to this whiskey and see what we have on the finish of this whiskey. Into the finish. So finally, to conclude this whiskey, in terms of on the finish for the Lakes, the one port cask finish, for me the finish for this one is nice and long. It really just holds itself well on the palate, and for me I'm getting those wood spices accompanied by red fruits, those cranberries, juicy as well as dry red fruit, which is really quite pleasant. There is even a little bit of sweet tobacco, and then it develops a slight green herbal character, which is quite surprising because I didn't get that on the palate, but now on the finish, as I'm leaving it there, I'm getting around about the right side of my palate. It just reminds me of like a matcha tea. If any of you have tried matcha desserts, which is a green tea from Japan, it just reminds me of that green powdery character from a matcha dessert that I've actually had whilst I was in London. So I don't know what it is about that. It's dry, it dries the palate, but it's got that green sort of herbal tea character. It's rather interesting for me. So yeah, in terms of actual score for this whiskey, now I'm going to give you the score and what I think of it. So originally I was going to give it about an 85, 86, and now throughout this tasting it's actually developed a lot more. I'm giving this one here an 87. 87 out of 100. I am quite impressed, and I will explain that. So nose palate finish, it does a lovely job. In terms of does it need water and time, for me, water, it's optional. You can add a few drops if you're just buying a bottle and going from go. However, the main thing I found, which is really developed with this one, is time. Giving it time, it really starts to open out, and it just keeps developing. And that's something I really like with this whiskey. If you're able to find, I think this is 2020, because that's what it says on the sample, and that's what I showed in the beginning of the video. For me, this one definitely works well. Give it some time, let it breathe a little bit in your glass. And for me, I'm quite impressed. From when I first tasted this whiskey, the first sample I tried, it's developed, it's evolved, and for me, it's got I'd say much better than what it was when I first tried it. So I'm very impressed with this one. The one port cask finish gets an 87 out of 100 from me and Mr. Bananas. Yeah, I'm actually quite impressed. It has developed and it has changed a lot, and I was originally going to give it 86, but it has changed with some time and some oxygen in that little sample. So it's definitely something, I think, in terms of value for money at £48. Nowadays, you get a lot of whiskey coming in at £48. Some of them are not even great quality. It's just because companies that produce stuff. This one has been done very well, nicely blended. And for me, I personally really like it. So that's my score, 87 out of 100. Let me know your thoughts down below in the comment section if you've tried the Lakes Port Cask. What is your opinions on this whiskey? But this is going to be me, JasonWhiskyWise, Mr. Bananas. If you have enjoyed the video, drop it a thumbs up. Be sure to hit the subscribe button, which we'll leave over there. There's some other videos up on screen. Wow, I'm actually quite mesmerized by this. It has changed a lot. I need to find a bottle. So this has been me, JasonWhiskyWise, Mr. Bananas, and we'll catch you all for the next video. Slander.